I think seeing different generations engage with one another doesn't start with agreement on what an institution should look like, such as the church. It's got to start with the gospel. And it's got to start with us falling in love once again with the amazing grace embedded in the gospel. Not in just a religious sense of singing Amazing Grace, but this propensity that God has demonstrated to restore us to the ultimate purpose for our humanity, a new way of life. And so often, though, you see the, lack of better terms, maybe the baby boomers and the millennials and having disagreements, yes, maybe about worship or form and what's taking place within the church. And at its worst, you've got boomers that are, as I read an article by Dan Reiland, he was talking about boomers tend to be entrenched in the worst sense of the word, and sometimes millennials can convey that they're wanting to be entitled in the worst sense. And both of those need to be disarmed as we engage around not just how we do church, but why we do church. John wrote in his gospel, in John 20:31, he says, "This reason I've written my gospel." He says that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. I call that part A. And what I refer to as part B, and that by believing you may have life in his name. I think in that verse there is some of the tension that comes out between millennials and boomers in this way. Part A is about orthodoxy. Believing that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, absolutely critical. But part B is equally important. It's about vibrancy. That by believing we may have life in his name. And I think that baby boomers might say, what's important is part A. Part B doesn't really matter. What millennials often will say is what matters is part B, vibrancy. Part A, orthodoxy, doesn't really matter. And it's us coming together. In that article I mentioned by Dan, talked about trust talked about three ingredients, trust being one, partnership being another, and empowerment, where both sides are kind of laying down their control over what they think is right in learning, beginning to trust, like the millennials trusting the wisdom and experience of the boomers and their understanding of orthodoxy. But it's us as boomers trusting millennials and saying, you guys can teach us a bit more about what vibrancy looks like. What does life in his name look like? And I think that we as boomers have done a disservice to millennials in that we spent so much time on part A that we've not taught or modeled part B. And I think that's one of the reasons millennials are leaving the church, because they're saying, you know what? Teach me what life in his name looks like. I'm not interested in just alignment on a Sunday with an institution. What does the gospel taste like? Is it robust enough? Is it weighty enough to fuel me on a daily basis? And I think just in that question, it makes boomers nervous because it exposes us to say so much of what we've been doing is preaching and not modeling. And I think we both can come together with that sense of empowering one another to say, we'll trust you as you teach us orthodoxy. And boomers may be saying, we'll trust you as you teach us vibrancy. And what would happen in worship in churches, let's say, if both orthodoxy and vibrancy were seen to be companions and not enemies?